Imagine you've just finished like a really mentally demanding task. You close your laptop or you just get out of a long meeting and there's this sudden quiet lull in your day.
Right, just that empty space.
Yeah, exactly. And without even actively making a conscious decision, your hand just sort of slips into your pocket. You unlock your phone, open an app, and you just start scrolling.
Or, you wander into the kitchen and open the pantry, even though you aren't the least bit hungry.
Yes. I mean, you didn't weigh the pros and cons of doing that. You didn't sit down and plan out a leisure activity. You just flinched away from a split second of boredom looking for a tiny hit of comfort. So today we are doing a deep dive into the hidden mechanics behind that exact automatic reflex.
It is an incredibly pervasive phenomenon,
Yeah.
and to dissect it today, we're pulling from a deeply fascinating source text titled Van Bun Duk Dan, which translates to pasted text.
Which is such a rich document, honestly.
It really is. What makes it so compelling is that it doesn't just look at this as, a modern tech problem. It breaks down the intersection of our fundamental biology, the invisible structures of our modern society, and some surprisingly profound philosophical truths about pleasure itself.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because the mission of this deep dive is to answer a crucial question for you. Are you actually choosing your everyday pleasures, or are you just blindly being pulled toward them?
Right, and more importantly, how do you regain a sense of control over that?
Exactly. And to start, we really have to look inward, right? Like, before we blame society or algorithms, we all know the basic dopamine loop stimulus, reward, memory.
The basic biology of a crying baby,
Yeah.
essentially.
A baby doesn't understand the grand meaning of life. It just feels discomfort, it cries, gets fed, feels comfort, and the brain remembers that cycle. It's an unlearned reflex. Seek what feels good, avoid what causes pain.
And our source text pushes past just the fMRI scans and maps this onto some foundational philosophy. It starts with Sigmund Freud's concept of the pleasure principle.
Right, the idea that we're just naturally driven to seek pleasure and avoid pain.
Exactly. Freud mapped this out long before we had a clinical understanding of neurotransmitters.
Right.
He observed that human beings are fundamentally driven to seek the pleasant and avoid the unpleasant without needing like a grand philosophical reason for it.
It's just the default operating system.
It really is. When you feel that slight mental fatigue or emptiness, your brain registers it as a low-level threat. It's discomfort.
And the existential philosophers highlighted in our source material, Jean-Paul Sartre and Friedrich Nietzsche, had a lot to say about this, didn't they?
They did. Sartre noticed that we constantly surround ourselves with noise. Like we leave the TV on in the background, we put headphones in the second we step outside, we endlessly scroll.
It's like we're terrified of just being quiet.
Yes. Sartre argued that we actually fear the emptiness of silence, because sitting in the silence forces us to face ourselves. It forces an internal reckoning.
Wow. So it's essentially using constant consumption as like noise-canceling headphones for your own internal monologue?
Precisely. And this is where Nietzsche introduces a really vital distinction. He pointed out that in these moments, we aren't actually looking for joy.
Wait, really? We're not looking for joy.
No, because joy is an active pursuit. It requires engagement, vulnerability. What we are desperately seeking in these micro moments is just pain relief.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, we are treating a symptom. We just want to mask the mental fatigue. Our biological programming makes running away from the negative the path of least resistance.
You know, it makes me think of an analogy. It's like an emotional reflex, just like pulling your hand off a hot stove without even thinking about it.
That's a great way to put it.
Right. Your conscious mind hasn't even registered the burn yet, but your nervous system jerks your hand back. In the same way, when you feel the heat of mental fatigue or emptiness, you are instantly jerking your mind away by opening an app. You're flinching away from the heat.
That is the perfect mechanism to visualize. And what's fascinating here is how Albert Camus viewed this dynamic. Camus wrote extensively about the human search for meaning in a universe that is fundamentally absurd.
Right, the idea that we can't really control the macro forces of the world.
Exactly. And that lack of control generates profound anxiety. So in an absurd, uncontrollable world, pleasure becomes a temporary anchor.
So we aren't actually solving our problems.
Not at all. We're just trying to make the present moment lighter. When you grab that sugary snack, you aren't fixing the underlying absurdity of life. You're just dropping an anchor in a stormy sea to hold yourself steady for, 5 minutes.
So if our internal wiring is basically just this automatic flinch away from discomfort, which makes total sense biologically, it begs a massive question. What happens when the world around us realizes this?
Right, when we move from internal biology to external society.
Exactly, because the text makes a really sharp pivot here. It looks at a society that is explicitly designed to feed this exact reflex.
And it does that by engineering an environment of continuous, frictionless pleasure. The source text brings in Karl Marx's theories on economic optimization to explain this.
Because economies just optimize for whatever keeps people around, right?
It's exactly. Marx noted that capital systems naturally optimize for engagement, not out of some moral stance, but purely for efficiency. If quick hits of pleasure keep people engaged, the market will supply them endlessly.
And the sociologist Max Weber talked about this too, the obsession with efficiency.
Yes, Weber's idea of societal efficiency applies directly to pleasure. We demand a result that requires zero time, zero deep investment, just a quick, calculable result.
Which brings in Jean Baudrillard. He observed that modern society provides easily consumable experiences rather than authentic realities.
Because authentic reality has friction.
Right. If you want to have a real connection with a friend, you have to coordinate schedules, travel, navigate their mood, deal with awkward pauses, there's risk.
It takes effort.
Exactly. But if you just want the feeling of social connection, you can just open an app. It's fast, easy, and totally low risk. And Michel Foucault, his perspective on this is kind of terrifying.
It really is. Foucault argued that power doesn't need to force you to do things. It just creates an architecture where staying with difficult emotions is incredibly hard because the exit is always right there.
The exit being your phone or the snack in the kitchen.
Yes. You are never more than an arm's reach away from an anesthetic. The environment makes it frictionless to escape.
Wait, so I have to push back a little here, though. Is the system maliciously trapping us? Or is it just a perfectly efficient market giving us exactly what our brains asked for?
That's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah, because it feels like human biology requested a small snack, and society responded by building us an endless all-you-can-eat buffet where the food gets shoved into our mouths before we even sit down. We asked for it, didn't we?
It is the ultimate expression of supply perfectly meeting demand. It isn't necessarily a malicious cabal in a boardroom trying to trap us. But the danger lies in the physiological consequence of that endless buffet.
Because it changes our baseline.
Exactly. Drawing on Camus again, the text notes that humans have an inherent drive for deep, substantive meaning. But society hands us sheer volume instead.
An avalanche of shallow experiences.
Yes. And because you are constantly flooded with easy dopamine, your baseline for what feels normal shifts upward. You eventually need these quick hits just to maintain a normal state. The baseline of a quiet room suddenly feels agonizing.
Which perfectly sets up the next crucial point from our source. We've seen the biological demand, we've seen the endless societal supply, but what is the actual result of consuming all this frictionless pleasure?
It certainly isn't happiness.
No, it doesn't lead to happiness at all. According to the text, it leads to profound numbness. They refer to it as the existential drop.
The existential drop. It is a highly specific, very modern sensation. It's that quiet emptiness you feel right after you finish a video or right after you eat a snack.
It's not really sadness, though.
No, it's just the feeling of not enough. You consume the experience, but your internal state hasn't actually improved.
I know exactly what you're talking about. The screen goes black, you see a reflection, and you just feel blank. And the source mentions Sartre's observation here. He noted that human beings are always trying to move forward, to progress.
But in this engineered pleasure loop, we aren't progressing. We're just repeating.
Repetition without progression. You click the next mediocre video just because there's no reason to stop, or you finish a snack and feel no better than before.
And this is where Nietzsche's insight cuts straight to the core. He argued that pleasure doesn't actually fill the void. It merely covers it up temporarily.
It's a cheap bandage. And Marcus Aurelius, the Stoic philosopher, he essentially said the same thing thousands of years ago. What arrives quickly, leaves quickly.
Because it requires no effort, the effect dissipates almost instantly. And because the feeling doesn't last, we don't stop. We actually increase the dose.
Here's where it gets really interesting. We rationally know it's making us feel hollow, but we seek faster, more intense hits anyway, not because we enjoy them more, but because our tolerance has gone up. We are running on a treadmill.
Exactly. We're running in a circle to avoid sitting still.
We're no longer running towards something we want.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, this is the actual breaking point the text warns about. We hit a state where pleasure is no longer enough to mask the discomfort, yet we keep consuming it.
Because we literally don't know how to do anything else.
Right. We simply don't know how to tolerate the discomfort of doing nothing. The reflexes become entirely autonomous.
So if this endless loop is making us numb, the knee-jerk reaction for anyone listening might be to just swear off all pleasure entirely.
To just throw your smartphone in the river.
Right, I'm never eating sugar again, I'm going off the grid.
But the philosophers in our source material actually warn against that extreme, don't they? They offer a surprisingly practical alternative.
They do, and it's a vital distinction. The text is clear that extreme discipline, or asceticism like avoiding all pleasure, is a trap of its own.
Because it fights human nature. Yes. We spent the first part of this deep dive establishing that the drive for comfort is a hardwired survival mechanism. You cannot out-willpower your own nervous system.
And Sartre and Camus, they certainly didn't condemn pleasure. They enjoyed life.
Right, they just warned against using it to hide. And Seneca and Nietzsche agree on this. Seeking pleasure doesn't make you weak. Becoming dependent on it is what makes you weak.
Ah. The problem isn't the pleasure itself. It's the inability to tolerate life without it.
Which leads us to the Stoic strategy, from thinkers like Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius. You don't have to eliminate desires, you just have to stop them from being unconscious reflexes.
So how do we practically do that?
The practical step is brilliantly simple. You insert a 1-second pause before acting.
Just 1 second.
Just 1 second, before you scroll or before you eat. You just stop and ask, am I hungry, or am I seeking joy, or am I just avoiding an uncomfortable thought?
So what does this all mean for the listener? Are you saying we have to intensely interrogate ourselves every single time we want to eat a cookie or watch a movie? That sounds exhausting.
It's a common fear, but no, you don't have to become a perfect, emotionless monk. It's simply about observing the impulse so you aren't dragged blindly by it.
Just bringing it into the light.
Exactly. The goal is to build a tiny bit of tolerance for the uncomfortable gap between a stimulus and your reaction. In that pause, you get to choose.
I love that. So to briefly recap the journey for you today, we started with our hardwired instinct to avoid pain. Then we saw how modern society weaponizes that instinct into an endless feed of distraction.
Which leads to that hollow burnout, the existential drop.
Right. And finally, we arrived at the Stoic solution, reclaiming your freedom through a simple 1-second pause.
And the most liberating takeaway here is that you don't have to give up the things you enjoy. You can still watch the videos, you can still eat the snacks.
But the difference is that now you have the power to actually choose those experiences rather than using them as an escape hatch.
It changes everything about how you engage with your day.
It really does. Now, the source text leaves us with a heavy question. How many times a day are we truly seeking pleasure versus just running away from ourselves?
A tough question to face.
It is. So let's take that one step further for you to mull over after this deep dive ends. If you finally manage to take that 1-second pause and you realize you are running away, what exactly is the scary truth about yourself that you think you'll find if you finally sit still in the silence?